Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, and welcome to my wrap up of all of the books I read in the month of July. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and in the month of July I did not do as well as I hoped with reducing that number of way too many books. But that's a conversation for later on. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. And in my wrap-ups, what I usually do is a few brief stats followed by talking about the books I read roughly in order from my least favourite to my most favourite. And then at the end of the video, I will be updating you on the numbers of my giant TBR. And I'd say right at the start, as a spoiler, it's not very likely to have gone down in the month of July. It was a bit of a different month's reading for me. It was definitely the most like a reading slump that I have ever felt since I've been on booktube. Reading slowed right down. I didn't read as much as I would usually expect to, especially in the summer. With a lot of the books that were physical books this month, I did also use free audiobooks to help me get through the books, which isn't something I normally do, but I did really enjoy, and it did really help me with reading this month to both listen and read physically. And that worked really well for me. So that was one way that I tried of busting the slump. My stats for the month of July, a bit lower than my usual ones. I read 11 books in total, and I would say that it definitely felt like less than that, and it will become clear how I managed to read 11 books while in a reading slump. But one of the ways was on the last day of the month I read a graphic novel, which felt a lot like cheating to me, but I didn't want it to add to my giant TBR, and I had just bought it, so yeah, that happened. It's more like 10 books to me. Storygraph is telling me that this was a total of 3,504 pages, and it was 100% fiction this month. I didn't actually attempt any non-fiction at all. 3 of my books were purely audiobooks. 3 were from the Giant Bookshelf, but I think probably at least 2 of those I used audio to help me as well. So very grateful for the 2 library apps, Libby and BorrowBox, I have access to. 1 book was a reread. 2 books were in an omnibus that I'll show you in a minute. 1 book was a new buy, which was the graphic novel I just mentioned, and 2 were from the library. So I am carrying on 3 books into August that I haven't finished yet. 1 was The Bone Collector, which is a buddy read with Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl. I am also currently reading Black Ice by Karen Gerhardsen, which was the book I got from Mr. B's, I think, in June. I'm also still chipping away at the Ray Bradbury short story collection, Killer Come Back to Me. I did read a couple of short stories from that this month. The other thing that was different about reading in July, and maybe this was because of the slump, is that nearly everything in the month was a similar sort of rating for me. I didn't really read any spectacular books in July. The majority of my books are falling into my good category this month, and all of them in that good category this month I rated 3.5 stars. So I would normally say good is a book that's 3 stars or 3.5. I enjoyed everything that I read in its way, but I probably wasn't enjoying reading as much as I normally would, if that makes sense. So let's get on with the books. I've got 2 audiobooks to talk about first, and the first one was The Martian by Andy Weir. I think I had carried this over from June, and I've been listening to it. I did find this book quite boring in places. I don't think that's a reflection on Andy Weir, because I think I do like his writing. I really loved Project Hail Mary last year, but I think for me The Martian and Project Hail Mary were too similar. I think maybe if I'd have read The Martian first I would have enjoyed it more, but there were so many similar aspects between the 2, and I really did love Project Hail Mary, and this book didn't really have like the extra injection of a great character that Project Hail Mary has. It's very much like a solo story of one person stranded on Mars and it was interesting in places. In other places I really felt this dragged. Both of the two books are quite science heavy, and I don't really enjoy that aspect to it, and there is a lot of that. I liked the main character, he was fine, but I don't think I quite liked him as much as the main character in Project Hail Mary. So I will definitely go on and watch the film, because I've been told the film is very good as well. I just didn't find it that exciting. I felt like it kind of slipped into a pattern of everything's going well, oh, another massive disaster derails it going well, oh, he gets everything back on track again, oh, another disaster has derailed things. So I just found it a bit repetitive in that sense, but I still enjoyed this book. It probably took me a bit too long to listen to it. I think I listened to some other things in between starting this and finishing it. It was fine. This was for the Killer Reads Thriller Month Book Club, which is hosted by AJ over AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, and it wasn't my favourite that we've read in that book club, but it was fine. Second up was my buddy read with the lovely Flick, and that was The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. So the first appearance of a book that was on my Jane Austen July TBR. So this is not quite exactly what I thought it would be, but not in a bad way. At first, the reading of this book for me was delayed by the fact that I hadn't realised it collects together like a lot of the main couples from all of Jane Austen's 6 books. When I listened to like the author's note at the beginning, I realised rapidly that all of those characters were going to feature, and that perhaps there were going to be spoilers for Sense and Sensibility, which I was reading at the time. And I didn't want spoilers for that. I didn't actually know who was going to end up with who in Sense and Sensibility. So I wanted to keep that a surprise. So I had to delay reading it a little bit. But when I did get to reading it, it was actually a very enjoyable listen. I thought I would struggle with Jane Austen's characters being used by a different author, because I really didn't enjoy Death Comes to Pemberley very much last year, and I thought that this would be a similar sort of thing. But I actually did think that Claudia Gray did an okay job of writing Jane Austen's characters. It was fine. And what elevated this book for me was 2 new characters that she had invented, Jonathan Darcy and Juliet Tilney. And I think that these characters are really successful because you don't have those feelings about them from Jane Austen's books. They are great characters in their own right that the author has invented. And I do believe she's written another book featuring these 2, so I will definitely get to that. What I would say about this book is that it's quite fun. It's a mystery involving various characters from Jane Austen's books and these 2 new characters who sort of end up investigating the death of Mr. Wickham when all of these parties are like staying with Emma. This definitely did have some interesting mystery elements. I did enjoy the central mystery, but I did feel a little bit unsatisfied by some elements, and that's probably all I can really say without spoilering it. But it's a good fun read if you're like a fan of Jane Austen who doesn't mind somebody else writing about Jane Austen's characters. Next up, we have something that has been really helping me unexpectedly get out of my reading slump, and that is Aurora Teagarden. If you've watched my other wrap-ups this year, you will know that I was reading the Aurora Teagarden series 1 book a month with Amy from Booktube with Amy and Ange from Ange's Book Chatter, who are hosting Into the Library, which is a read-along to read all of the Aurora Teagarden mysteries by Charlaine Harris. These books have persistently come lowest in the rankings every month, pretty much, apart from last month. So they haven't been my favourites, but they are incredibly easy to read and they are quite fun when you're reading them, even though I don't really like Aurora very much as a character, which is a bit of a problem in a main character. These are still like fun, fast-paced, cosy, super easy to read, and that was what I needed. So the book for July was called Last Seen Alive, and that was the penultimate book in this massive omnibus that I'm very, very glad to say I will not have to hold up for much longer, because I not only read Last Seen Alive, which was the July book, I read Poppy Done to Death, which was the August book, and when I got to the end of that, all I wanted to do was read more Aurora Teagarden, because it was just one of those things where you kind of go on a binge of a series, getting you out of a reading slump. I was enjoying it, so I also picked up the audiobook of the next book in this series, All the Little Liars, which should have been September's book. I binged 3, I've got 1 left to read, but luckily by binging the 2 that were left in this book, I have finished this omnibus, so it finally gets ticked off the giant TBR. I had to read all 4 in this in order for it to leave the TBR, so I'm very, very happy about that. Last Seen Alive was probably my least favourite of the 3, but the series is definitely picking up by that point. We have a movie being filmed in Lawrenceston, which is where Aurora Teagarden lives. This movie is connected to her because it's a film based on what happened in her town in basically the first book in the series, Real Murders. So that was the premise. It was actually a pretty enjoyable mystery. I didn't think, for me, the central mystery was amazing, but then again, it wasn't terrible either. So I did enjoy this one enough for it to make me carry on reading the series. I thought Poppy Done to Death was probably one of the best mysteries in this series. Over time, Charlaine Harris's writing has definitely been getting better and better. And by Poppy Done to Death, I feel like Aurora had become, if not a nicer character, then at least a more mellow, well-rounded character who was not irritating me as much as she had before. So I won't spoiler the rest of these books, but yeah, I did give 3.5 stars to both of those and very much enjoyed them. And to be honest, I've put them above The Martian and The Murder of Mr. Wickham because they just really hit the spot. They were exactly what I needed at the time that I needed it. So yeah, fair play to Aurora Teagarden. So as I've said, I also went on to listen to book 9 on audiobook. And the only reason for picking it up on audiobook was because I was just desperate to keep up that reading momentum. So I just immediately listened to it on audiobook. Again, very readable. This one is not set later, but it was written, I think, about 13 years later, after the last one, which was originally the last in the Aurora Teagarden series. Charlaine Harris then went back to it 13 or so years later and wrote 2 more. Her writing has definitely developed over those 13 years. So I would say it's a much more accomplished book. However, the mystery at the centre of it wasn't really ticking all my mystery boxes. It wasn't like a murder mystery. While I thought it was good and probably better plotted than many of the books in the series, and I do like a lot of the characters a lot better than I have liked them at any point so far in the series, I don't think that this mystery was the best for me, but I do think that other people reading the series might have enjoyed it. 3 books in the Aurora Teagarden series binged, and I did feel a lot better after that and ready to read a lot more. That's my cure for a reading slump, is read cosy mysteries that you can just whiz through. So the last book in my good books category this month is going to be The Memory of Animals by Claire Fuller. This is a book that I found very intriguing and I think has a brilliant premise. This book was written before the pandemic and published after the pandemic, and it's about a pandemic that is so freakishly similar to the pandemic we have just lived through, with some differences that I think some people might find it hard to get past that. If you don't want to read about a pandemic that's quite similar to our pandemic, then I wouldn't read this book. There's also a lot of stuff about an octopus or octopi in general, so that's a weird spin. But the premise of this was great. The main character is basically going in a vaccine trial, is going to be given the vaccination and given the virus. So she's like in this unit when everything goes from bad to worse in this sort of apocalypse type thing. I think to say more about it than that would be to spoiler it. I really enjoyed the opening. I flew through 100 pages in like an evening. I did then slow down a bit, and the middle section of this book, probably another 100 pages, took me so long to read, or maybe it didn't, but it felt like it. I just think that there's one particular element of this book like that felt a bit gimmicky and felt a bit not needed. Like, I feel like this book could have had a past timeline for the main character without using this sort of gimmick, but that's just my thoughts on it. So I was interested in the character's past, but I wasn't as interested in her past as I was in like learning about the apocalypse that was happening in the present timeline. It did pick up again at the end. I really enjoyed what happened in like the plotty bit, but I did feel really unsatisfied by the final ending because I felt like the final chapter was a bit info dumpy. It almost felt to me like, and I'm sure that this is not the case, I'm sure it was all planned like that, but it read to me like the author had been told, your book's got to be handed in today, and so she just hurried. That could just be me. I was in a big reading slump. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you've read The Memory of Animals. What did you think of that final chapter? But please do try not to spoil it for other people. Interesting concept of a book, and very weird, but at times I felt like it was going out of its way to be weird with the octopus stuff, rather than just trying to tell us the interesting parts of the story. But a good book nonetheless, one I had a good time with for the majority of the time that I was reading it, and I think if I'd have enjoyed the ending more, I would have been rating this book a lot more highly, despite its flaws. So going into very good books, I rated this 4 stars, but it was a book I carried on from July into August, and I already feel like I should have given it less than 4 stars, so maybe this should be in the good category as well. Probably more of a 3.5, because this was Missing You by Harlan Coben. I was reading this for the Janelle-a-thon, and that meant that I should have finished it a long time ago, but I finished it in August in the end. And I don't think this is one of my favourite Harlan Cobens by a long stretch. The central mystery was quite interesting, but the main character was a bit neither here nor there for me. And I did try to boost my reading of this by listening to an audiobook. For me personally, the audiobook for this, it was helpful in me being able to listen to the book at times, but the audiobook was not well matched to this book. Unfortunately, the narrator was male and the lead character is female, and I can never understand why that decision would be made, because that didn't work for me. There were some really good, like, thrillery Harlan Coben-y elements to this that I very much enjoyed, so that's probably why I've given it a 4. But I did think that the ending, again, I keep not liking endings this month. Again, I do think that the ending, for me anyway, I just couldn't believe in the ending of this. Without spoiling this, it was a ending that involved a key relationship in the book, and I just don't think it was believable that the reaction to what happened at the end was what was written. I just didn't believe it, and that was a shame, because up until that point I think it had been quite a strong book. As I say, it's not a favourite Harlan Coben, but I still enjoyed reading it. Next up, this is the graphic novel I read at the very end of the month, and there is a reason for the purchase of this book. So my husband bought me this. Deadpool does Shakespeare, and he bought me this because we went to see a show at Shakespeare's Globe. We went to see Macbeth at the Globe, and This was just an amazing experience. I've wanted to go to Shakespeare's Globe forever. Like, I've always wanted to go and see a play there. Last summer we went and had a guided tour of the theatre. We did actually book to see something last year and then we couldn't go, so we ended up booking Macbeth for now instead, and it was brilliant, great experience. And one of the things that they had in the gift shop at the Globe was Deadpool Does Shakespeare. Now, how good is this cover for both Deadpool and Shakespeare? But yeah, as you would expect from a graphic novel called Deadpool Does Shakespeare, this was very, very silly, but I think that was the whole fun of it. My only complaint about Deadpool Does Shakespeare is that only half of this book was actually the Shakespeare storyline. So it also collected together 2 issues of Deadpool that were nothing at all to do with Shakespeare. So maybe because these collected volumes are generally a certain length and there was only like half a book's worth of the Shakespeare plot. This encompassed some aspects of Macbeth, Hamlet, King Lear and Romeo and Juliet mainly, although I think there were some references to other plays as well, and I thought it was great fun. Really enjoyed it. The other 2 stories were fine, but they were just not at all Shakespeare related. This was pretty hilarious and just an enjoyable, fun read. Definitely brain candy and also Shakespeare. So that was a great one. So I have 2 books left in my very good category and 1 favourite of the month. This was the book for FOMO Book Club, and I have a much longer discussion of The Dance Tree by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. I discussed this with my fellow hosts of FOMO Book Club, Jack from Spread Bookjoy and Gemma from Gemma Books, and we discussed this earlier this month. You can see the full discussion, I will link it. I feel like I've read this a very long time ago, and I thought that this was a really beautifully written book. It has very lovely language and talks about a very difficult, poignant subject. But Jack and Gemma and I were all agreed that our favourite characters in this book and the people whose stories we were most interested in were actually the side characters. The main character in this book is not, for me, the star attraction. Her storyline is very sad and emotional, and I felt for her. The other people in her life and in this story were incredibly interesting. I don't think this book was at all what I thought it was going to be, but that was fine, because what it was a really interesting book, but it was also the sort of book where I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I still think, even after that long discussion with the others, I still don't think I know how I feel about this 100%. There is a very hard main topic in this that I don't think is talked about very much. It's like centering around miscarriages and baby loss. But yes, it's a very hard-hitting book, but one that I thought was a worthwhile read, and I did enjoy it. Last up in my very good category would be Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This was my main Austen read for the month of Jane Austen July. I have shared some thoughts on this in my Austen Awards video, which I'll link below, which was both a ranking of Jane Austen's main 6 books and just a chat about my favourites in Jane Austen. I thought that this book was a lot of fun. Without comparing it to any other Jane Austens, it's just a fun book. I thought it was really funny in places, especially the characters of John Dashwood and Fanny Dashwood, who are just a hilarious couple. Fanny Dashwood is very nasty, and I think Jane Austen does a wonderful job of writing side characters who are not very nice people. And speaking of not very nice people, I also really enjoyed the character of Willoughby. And yeah, Willoughby is a bad lot, but loved it. I thought that was the best part of the storyline, was Willoughby. The sisters Eleanor and Marianne, who this book centres around, are fine, but by far the most interesting plot is definitely happening with the side characters. I couldn't help but really enjoy this book. I think you can tell it's one of Jane Austen's earliest books. There are certain flaws to me in the plot of this one, and it just doesn't wrap up in the way that I probably thought it would. But I thought it was still a brilliant read. I wouldn't ever claim it was my favourite Jane Austen, but it was a lot of fun. And I buddy read that with Gemma from Gemma Books and Jack from Spread Bookjoy as well. And it was great. It's always great with classics to have somebody else to bounce ideas off. It was really nice to hear Jack's thoughts as somebody who loves Jane Austen, and really nice to hear Gemma's thoughts as somebody who doesn't so much love Jane Austen. But yes, this was a really enjoyable buddy read, and I can't wait to reread some of the other Jane Austens now that I've finished. My favourite of the month is a bit of a cop-out on a favourite of the month, because it was my one and only reread of the month, and I reread Agatha Christie's Dumb Witness for Christie Fest, which is hosted by Julie and Lil, and I'll link them in the description down below. I did a top 12 Poirot books last year, and this rated pretty highly. I think it might have even been in my top 5, if not my top 6. I had always thought that my fondness for this book was purely based on my favourite character who only appears in one book by Agatha Christie, Bob. Bob is a dog, just to put that out there. And I just love Bob the dog. I think that he doesn't play as great a role in the solving of the mystery in the book as he does in the TV series. The TV series episode is probably one of my favourite adaptations of Christie, and I don't often like adaptations. I do, of course, like the David Suchet Poirot series, but I think that that was one of the episodes that I remember being really, really good. So yeah, I thought all of my fondness about this book was due to Bob the dog, but actually, on rereading it, I realised that it wasn't just my sentimentality making me rate this highly on my list of Poirots. It was also the fact that it's a really good murder mystery. Closed circle, family drama, village life. Dumb Witness just has some great elements to it, and Poirot himself is on absolutely top form here. He is really, really funny. He does a great job of sticking to his guns and trying to solve this case, even though his client has been murdered very, very early on in this book. It's a point of pride to him to solve this case, of course. He was brilliant in this one, and it's one of the few Poirots that feature Captain Hastings. Hastings was his usual self as well, and I just think, as an example of a good murder mystery by Agatha Christie, you can't go far wrong with Dumb Witness, because it has all of that, and it has a great dog character, Bob, and you can tell Agatha Christie loved dogs and that she was basing Bob on a dog that she loved, because her writing of him as a character is just brilliant. Christie dedicated this book to my dear Peter, the most faithful of friends and dearest of companions, a dog in 1,000. Peter actually appeared on the hardback cover. That was Agatha Christie's own dog. A Dumb Witness, topping the charts of my July. I didn't read anything else that came close. We only have one thing left to do in this video, and that is to look at the giant TBR. Now, first of all, I have to confess I made a mistake on the numbers for June, because I am not very good at maths and I can't even count. When I took the number from the end of May, I took it from my notebook, whereas I should have taken it from my May video, because I had changed it when I said it, when I was recording it, because the numbers were one out, because I unhauled an extra book. That meant I started on 163 books in that video, when I should have started on 162 when I did my rundown of the numbers. But I'm going to start with 165 this month. That should have been the end of June number, but I messed it up. So I had 165 books on the giant TBR at the end of June. Then I received 3 more books for my birthday from my friends, which I have shown in another video, so that took us up to 168 books. I received my Mr. B's subscription book that I get every month, which takes us up to 169 books. I also won 2 giveaway prizes, one of which I've shown already, which was Love Me, Love Me Not by Kirsty Capes. The second one I haven't shown in a video yet, and that was Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocha. and I won this in a giveaway on Instagram from the lovely Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe. So thank you very much for sending me this, Olivia. A lovely, lovely giveaway prize, and this looks like quite a scary horror. So I will enjoy getting to that. I'll probably save it for Shorty September because it's nice and short. So with that added on, those two giveaway prizes, we're up to 171. As I said, I also hauled the Deadpool book, but I've already read it. So 171 books. Then I read 3 from my giant TBR, which were The Dance Tree, Missing You, and finally, I finished the Aurora Tea Garden Omnibus Volume 2. Yay! So that brings me down to 168 books on the giant TBR. I feel like we've been hovering around the 170, 165 mark for a long time now, because I keep acquiring books, and in July that TBR did go up by 3, and that was because I only read a pitiful 3 from the giant TBR, which I am quite disappointed in, but I just wasn't reading much in July. So there we go. We'll start August afresh. There is an occasion in August where I probably might buy a book. Hopefully I won't buy too many books, we will see. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this rambling wrap up, and if you have, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments, did you have a good reading month in July? What did you read? What was your favourite book of the month, or your least favourite if you want? Let me know if you've read any of the books that I read, and I would love to discuss those in the comments down below. Thanks for watching today. I hope to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.